Welcome to Toasting the Classics Sober Shorts. This is the solo series, just me, Dave McArthur, doing things alone. Today I decided I'm going to do a movie that I got to see recently. I've been on a little bit of a David Lynch kick ever since we did Blue Velvet. I swear it wasn't my fault, but David Lynch literally must have died while we were talking about the movie. So I got into a little bit of a David Lynch thing, including I watched Eraserhead, which is literally one of the weirdest film experiences I've ever had. I really don't know what to think about that, but I think that's probably what the point was. This time I'm doing a film called Wild at Heart from 1990, starring Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, directed by David Lynch, of course. The Alamo Drafthouse is doing a David Lynch film festival of sorts. I got tickets and it went down to Alamo in Lower Manhattan. I picked this movie first of all, because I was intrigued by seeing that Nicolas Cage was in it, and I was trying to mentally match Nicolas Cage with David Lynch and how crazy that would have to be. And I'd never seen it. I didn't know anything about it. Alamo's a great place. Anybody that doesn't go there on a regular basis, fix that. It's so great. I realized recently that just like I can get to Yankee Stadium by hopping on the B train, in 20 minutes I'm at Yankee Stadium, so I can go anytime. I realized I could take the C from my house all the way down to Fulton Street and walk out the door and I'm at Alamo. It's great. It's perfect. I'm actually considering getting a monthly subscription because you can go see as many movies as you want at the Alamo. I don't know if I'd actually go frequently enough. We were late, of course, because I was accompanied by my lovely wife, and I don't remember any time I've ever been to almost anything on time. And Alamo threatens you that if you get there late, you're not going to be able to go. You're going to be blocked from going into the movie. So I was really pushing to get there on time. You know, we're running out of the subway station. We're hurrying to it's an old repurposed office building. Alamo's down in the sub-basement, like 3 floors down below this office building. They've got one floor that's tennis courts and pickleball courts, underground, indoors. It's very New York type of thing to have. The second floor seems to be an entire room filled with pianos that have been painted. There's never anybody in there. It just sits there all day. I don't know how anybody's using Manhattan office space in such a way. We get there and I'm, thinking we're not going to be able to go because of the late policy. But not only did they let us in, the guy didn't even look at our tickets. We were just like, we're going, and he's like, yeah, go ahead. So we go on in. We're fine. When you go into the Alamo Lower Manhattan, this is a little bit of a footnote. As there was this video store in Manhattan years and years ago, like up until the early 2000s, called Kim's Video, that had like 60,000 movies, esoteric art movies, weird stuff. It was really famous all over. Finally, of course, as the 2000s go on and Netflix takes over, they eventually have to close. But it was such a big, important collection of movies that they ended up contracting a villa in Salemi, Italy, to hang on to these videos, and they were just in some old house in a tiny town. Nobody was allowed to go see them. They were just sitting there, kind of like a museum or like a vault at the Smithsonian or something, but of really weird movies from the 80s and 90s. It all sat there, and then somebody, I can't remember who, there was a documentary about it, but somebody purchased them all, and now Alamo just has this giant collection of crazy movies in the downstairs. Back to the movie. I don't know if other people who know more about movies than me would disagree with this, but I think when you're talking about an auteur director, right, there's famous ones like Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, right? Stanley Kubrick's probably close to an argument against what I'm about to say, but I think David Lynch is the most distinctive, like the most auteur of auteur directors. Like when you see a David Lynch movie, there's no mistaking it, right? There's all these weird elements. There's things that you could just see right away that nobody else would do. And it's a lot of his actors that he uses all the time. I just think that maybe he's the most like that. I'd like to hear from anybody that has a different opinion. I mean, like Alfred Hitchcock movies, if you didn't know it was the same guy, it's kind of subtle. It's there. It's definitely there if you're paying attention. You can see. I watched Rebecca recently. You could see that it was a Hitchcock movie, even though it's pretty early in his work, but you could definitely see some elements. It's not quite the same as David Lynch, though. David Lynch is really, it's hard to miss. It's like a painting by a certain painter. You just see it right away that this has certain techniques that are getting repeated. Wild at Heart, 1990 movie, like I said, it's based on a book by an author named Barry Gifford. I'm not familiar with his work, and I didn't look it up, so I really still don't know anything about it. But basically, this looks to me like it was a novel that was just run through, like I said, the distinctive David Lynch filter. You took a regular book and you put it into his métier or something like that. It's an adaptation, technically, right? I mean, you're talking about something that's an adaptation. Dune is an adaptation. But in that one, there's just, I'm sure they were keeping him in line and making sure he stuck to the source material a lot more. It's just very distinctive. It's science fiction. I don't know. I haven't watched it recently enough to know how Lynchian it looks. I think that you have to be in the American landscape to really be a David Lynch film, because he's kind of commenting on America in a lot of ways. It's always small towns. It's always Americana mixed with the creepy and the underbelly. Like we talked about with Blue Velvet is like a really perfect marriage of all that. It's kind of like somebody had a dream about America and wandered around, and various nightmare and other images pop into how you're seeing the country. I know like Eraserhead, for example, started with an idea. David Lynch had a dream about a kid collecting erasers, collecting bits from somebody's head and then turning them into an eraser. And then that was sort of the inspiration image for the film. Anyway, so there's definitely a dreamy type of thing. But this one, Wild at Heart, is pretty straightforward. It has a linear plot, it has a clear narrative. There's some flashbacks that go back in time to sort of show you things that happened in the past, but nothing that's strange, nothing that you wouldn't expect. You just follow the film. What's weird is some of the events that happen during the linear narrative. That's definitely where you see that it's something different. So speaking of the plot of the movie opens in medias res. Sailor, that's Nicolas Cage's character, and he's with his girlfriend, played by Laura Dern, Lula. This guy comes in and tries to kill him. So he ends up killing the guy and going to jail, even though, as an attorney, I think I probably could have gotten him off on that one. But when somebody attacks you with a knife and then you kill them with your bare hands, I don't know, that doesn't seem like something you'd actually go to jail for unless you have a really bad lawyer. But there's a jump forward in time, and he's getting out of jail. He gets back together with Lula, and the two of them fall back in passionate love right away, because they're very young and very full of vinegar. They decide to take off and violate his parole and head off across the southern roads of the United States. It starts in South Carolina, maybe like Columbia or someplace like that, and they head west through New Orleans and then eventually out to western Texas and the deserts, which are clearly the California deserts as they're filmed. There are Joshua trees, but I believe diegetically it's supposed to be the desert of West Texas. So anyway, the mother is so angry about him taking away her daughter that she sends these killers after her. There's something going on. It's not even subtextual. The mother is definitely romantically interested. Romantic is the wrong word. The mother is sexually interested in Sailor. And I think part of why she wants to kill him and take her back from her daughter has a little bit more to do with her own feelings about the guy than with not wanting her daughter to date them. But it's a road trip that I'm pretty familiar with, this one going across the South. I've done multiple road trips across the South, from New Orleans, across Texas, and then all the way to California in the past. Weirdly enough, I hadn't seen this movie, I didn't know anything about it, but I distinctly remember having 2 different Chris Isaak albums and listening to them while I was driving across that gigantic swath of desert. You leave New Orleans. I left New Orleans in the evening, and we needed to be in LA in a couple of days. So, we just drove, and you drive and drive and drive without stopping, and I think we finally hit New Mexico about the time the sun was coming up, which is pretty good time if you know how far that is, but it was also like a 16-hour drive. This is a big part of the country. They get to a place called Big Tuna, Texas, and there are some sort of old associates of Sailor. I don't know exactly what kind of criminal network he's involved in, of course, but there's some people he knew. There's a guy named Bobby Peru, who's played by Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe is like phenomenal in this. I just watched Nosferatu, and Willem Dafoe seems kind of like a joke version of himself at this point. But at this time, he's powerful and charismatic and like a really villainous, creepy guy. And by the way, I saw Florida Project also recently, and he was great in that. I just didn't like him in Nosferatu, I guess is all I'm saying. But he's terrific in this. He's obviously a criminal, gets Sailor involved in an armed robbery. It goes wrong. Of course it goes wrong. You see it coming for about 15 minutes of the movie that there's going to be this gigantic train wreck of an armed robbery. It's coming, and then of course it explodes in this bloody mess, and 2 people get killed when they're robbing, and Willem Dafoe's character falls on his own gun and blows his own head off. It's incredibly bloody and graphic. They had to adjust that part to put more gun smoke to cover his face so it wouldn't be quite as graphic when he gets killed. It looks like something from Tarantino. And Tarantino, this is 1990, so this is a couple years before Tarantino, really. Although, apparently, he's working on his films at the same time. So I don't know whether to say that it's inspired or whether it's just in the zeitgeist. This looks like proto Quentin Tarantino, which is a lot of O's to say in a sentence. Obviously, the armed robbery goes terribly. He gets arrested. Flash forward another 5 or 6 years, I don't remember exactly, but he gets out and Lula has had his baby. They get together. He feels weird about the family, decides to leave her because he's just trouble, which is probably the right thing to do outside as a logical person. He goes off, walking down the street, gets beat up by a bunch of tough guys. That somehow inspires him. He's laying on the ground, beat up. Glinda the Good Witch appears. Yeah, you heard me right. This is what I'm talking about. You watch this and Glinda the Good Witch appears. Unless you're watching the original Wizard of Oz, this has got to be David Lynch, right? Glinda convinces him to go back to Lula. There's the scene where he runs across the hoods of the cars of a traffic jam to get to her and then sings her Love Me Tender by Elvis. This is the kind of thing, it's actually great. I loved it. I think you have to be on board, though. If you don't have the buy-in and the understanding of David Lynch's way of doing things, this all could be not just corny, but ridiculous, and you could be laughing at it instead of just enjoying it. I really think you should try to enjoy it, though. Try to buy in. The recap is really not what this movie is about. What it's about is these little flourishes all throughout the movie that just make it something better than it had to be. The adaptation that's being done. And the adaptation is sort of the script, right? I mean, there's a good script. There's a fun... He's done some good dialogue and stuff like that, but it's the adaptation in the sense of the director's vision, the art direction, and the choices of little things like Nicolas Cage is getting out of a car, and instead of just getting out, he does this weird backflip to get out. It's just fun, movie star, charismatic, cool stuff, plus this strange, dreamy way that everything happens in the movie. I have to admit, I have a little bit of fuzziness about the plot. There's sequences I remember, and I cannot tell you why they happened or what they did to drive the plot. There's this whole scene with Crispin Glover as, I believe it's Lula's mentally ill cousin, that is just incredibly entertaining and hilarious, but also dark. It's perfect David Lynch. But I don't know, what did that have to do with the movie? I really have no idea. There's this part, they're driving across the desert and they see a flipped over car. They stop and they check out to see if anybody's hurt. There's a couple of dead people in the car, but there's also a woman standing in the desert who's talking about having to find her lipstick, I think it is. And then they realize she's got a terrible head wound. She's walking around talking for a minute and then she just falls down and dies from this head wound. It doesn't really do anything for the plot. It's creepy and it sets the right emotional context. Lula reacts to it. She thinks that it's a bad omen, which of course, yeah, that does actually make a certain amount of sense. But I don't know what it's doing in the film. It's like something that would happen in a dream. It's just like a metaphor. Or David Lynch kind of obsessed with head injuries appear quite a bit in his films. Obviously, I don't even know if Eraserhead has a head injury per se, but it's about the head. He did a documentary called My Beautiful Broken Brain at one point that was about somebody with brain damage. There's the scene in Blue Velvet where he walks in and the guy's been shot in the head, but he's not dead. Or was it a knife? Anyway, I can't remember, but it's a terrible head injury, and the guy's still alive with the head injury. It's creepy. It says something about the mind and who we are. I could see why he'd be obsessed with it, and it's a weird image that recurs. There's a part where Nicolas Cage sings in a club, which at first seems like regular pacing, establishing the relationship. They're at a punk rock concert, or I guess it's technically speed metal. I think the guy comes up and challenges him. They have a slight fight. He sort of scares the guy, wins the fight, and then takes the microphone, and it turns into a weird musical number where he sings an Elvis song to Lula, which both works but also seems like a music. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a musical quite, but it's surreal. It's a very David Lynch moment. When he meets Bobby Peru at the trailer park, they're sitting at a table with every single character sitting at the table is interesting and quirky. Does not get explained later in the film at all, but you'd kind of want to see what is the backstory of each of these characters. They all have a very distinctive vibe, and random naked fat women walk out of a trailer and then dance around and then disappear. It's not explained why that happens, but it really does contribute to a mood and a tone to the film that it's just, I don't know, I enjoy it. The movie's also funny. I can't think of any great examples of times I laughed, but it's very Coen Brothers. There's a bit where Sailor wears a snakeskin jacket, which is actually something Nicolas Cage decided he wanted to wear for the film. David Lynch wrote him a line where every time someone comments on it, he says, "This is a snakeskin jacket. And for me, it's a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom," which to me is something you could hear George Clooney saying in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Or one of the many lines that people in Coen Brother movies, like in Big Lebowski, when people repeat lines like that. And those are obviously after this film, so I don't know who inspired who there a little bit, but there's definitely something similar in the way that they're a little bit self-consciously ridiculous, but also good lines in a weird sort of way, almost like you're aping something from a much older film that had stilted dialogue like that. Nicolas Cage in general is terrific in this movie. This is, I think the perfect vehicle for Nicolas Cage. I was thinking through movies that I liked with him, because he's a very strange actor. He's very polarizing, but not polarizing necessarily in terms of some people. But for me personally, I have seen movies where I thought he was awful. I mean, just awful. There's this film called Vampire's Kiss. He's terrible in it. Con Air, he's ridiculous. The Rock, I think, is right in the middle. The Rock, I liked him in it. He's pretty ridiculous, but I do still like that film. I think maybe there's a balance with Sean Connery that works. But here, clearly he's in on the joke in this movie. It's just like Raising Arizona, which is probably, I don't know, this might now be my favorite Nicolas Cage, but Raising Arizona has always been one of my favorite movies, and probably my favorite Nicolas Cage movie. He's perfect in it because it's just ridiculous enough. It allows you to forget about how kind of silly he is and just roll with how charismatic and funny he is. Like he's a fun physical actor to watch. He does all these great movements. He's doing weird karate moves in this for no reason. He does that backflip, like I said. The part where he runs across the top of the roofs of the cars is terrific. It just looks like it's a great movie moment. He's physical, he's funny, he's charismatic in the best kind of ways. I don't actually think Nicolas Cage is a dumb person, but I think he's best when playing someone who's pretty dumb, like Hyde in Raising Arizona or Sailor in this. I think it's the perfect place for him. So Laura Dern's kind of similar. I can't say I've been a huge fan of her in general. You know, Jurassic Park, she's just kind of in it. I think she's just sort of there. She's fine. But in Blue Velvet, I was like, oh, okay, I really like her all of a sudden. And again, in this, she's perfect in this. She's great. She's got a good character. Her character isn't just going along with things the same way she might have been when you've got such a powerful male lead. The two of them are kind of, they're not equally crazy, but they're equally along for the adventure, and it's fun to watch how they both react. It reminds me, how he's using Laura Dern here is kind of similar to Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction. It's perfect. It's like the perfect thing for her. In general, Uma Thurman, I don't know. I've been trying to watch Kill Bill. She's a little out of place in that. But in Pulp Fiction, I think Quentin Tarantino just used her perfectly. And I think Laura Dern really is done justice by David Lynch's work here. So Diane Ladd, I didn't mention Diane Ladd yet. She plays the mother. She plays Laura Dern's mother. It's up there for my biggest surprises that's actually Laura Dern's mother in real life. So I believe it's Diane Ladd and Bruce Dern must be her parents, which is kind of a Nepo baby thing. But so Diane Ladd was nominated for Best Supporting Actress at the Academy Awards for this. It's a fun part. It's a little over the top. I don't have a lot of history with her, so I can't really say I didn't react hugely to her part. This one seems pretty influential on a lot of other things. What I kept seeing when I watched it was True Romance, which I haven't seen in a long, long time, but in a lot of ways might have been my favorite Tarantino, although I'm aware that he's not 100% responsible for True Romance. But he was writing this about the same time. He was writing True Romance about the same time that this was being released. So I don't know how they could have influenced each other. They're both a lot like Bonnie and Clyde, but they're both kind of draw on Badlands, this movie with a young Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek in that film. True Romance definitely draws on it, uses the same music and everything. So maybe that movie just inspired a little bit of the look and everything of this. Both films, Christian Slater, the way he's dressed, he's obsessed with Elvis. The bloody climax is very similar to this movie. You know, the way Lula acts with him, she's just kind of obsessed with him. I just think it's weird. It was just something in the zeitgeist at the time. I don't really think one inspired the other. So my biggest surprise about this one, I wasn't really expecting the time to jump so much. It got me both times it happened. There's a time jump in the film where he gets arrested and goes to jail, which is fun and kind of parallel, and I like the way it's done, but I wasn't really expecting it. I didn't expect this to be such an influential and important movie, and like something. This one won the Palme d'Or. It won the Palme d'Or, and people booed it when it won because it was so polarizing from people. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Personally, I think you kind of have to get into this one to get it, and if you do, I think you'll feel very differently about it. I wasn't expecting this one to be like as much. There's a lot of nudity in the movie, and I wasn't expecting it to be as sexual. Lynch is usually really subtle about that kind of thing. So, I mean, those are my surprises. I think in a lot of ways, when I'm asking whether I'm going to toast it, I think what's going to surprise me is, my biggest surprise, rather, is that I really liked this one. I really came out of the movie theater. I was really happy I went to see it. Maybe just seeing it in the movie theater made it hit pretty well. Maybe if I'd been distracted at home, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. If you don't hear other people laugh, maybe you don't enjoy things the same way. As to whether I'd toast it, I think this might be my favorite David Lynch movie I've seen so far. I did really enjoy Blue Velvet, but this one I think has better actors. I think it's Nicolas Cage. Harry Dean Stanton is in it. I didn't even mention him yet. Willem Dafoe. I think the cast is terrific and really working at the top of their game. I think they really wanted to work with David Lynch, and I think they did, and I think it worked very well. I think that probably puts it over the edge a little bit, being a little better than what I thought of Blue Velvet, though I liked that quite a bit. I'm talking about that was an 8, this is a 9. I don't know how I didn't see this movie, but I guess basically, I was 12 when it came out. I'd heard a lot of things about how crazy David Lynch movies were, and I guess that sort of just didn't appeal to me at the time. Indie films with nudity just weren't on my radar in 1990, as it turns out, because I was a kid. I've still never seen Twin Peaks, and now I'm kind of looking forward to it. I hope it's going to be anything like these movies that I've just seen recently, because I've really enjoyed them, and if it's anything like that, I have a feeling it's going to be annoying that I don't think it has much of a conclusion, and you sort of don't get to see what happens at the end, and I like how these are self-contained and they're finished. It's a finished product, and I like that. But I am definitely toasting this film. I think you should go watch it. I think you should make sure you're getting on board and that you get what's happening, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I recommend it highly. Definitely a Toasting the Classics classic. If I had a drink, if this wasn't Sober Shorts, my drink would be up and clinking. So thank you very much for joining me by myself. I'm glad you've been tolerating just hearing my voice this time. Peace out.